I recently heard a commentator speak about the latter part of Mark chapter 1 as a day in the life of Jesus. What happens in that day? He goes into a village, proclaims the kingdom of God, calls disciples, teaches, heals the sick, casts out demons, prays. In sum, faithful to the mission the Father gives him, he reaches out to people in need. He goes to where they are, brings God's presence, calls people to life. In a sense, we can say the same of the incarnation itself. In Jesus, God has come to search us out, to lavish forgiveness upon us, to speak tenderly to us. Pope Francis gives us a beautiful image in this regard. He writes, God meddles in our miseries. He approaches our wounds and heals them with his hands. It was to have hands he became human. This was God's first mercy, to come to where we are, to become who we are, to show us God's face. It was to have hands he became human. With those hands he reached out to us, reached out in a special way to those who were on the peripheries, who were vulnerable or in need. Sometimes in the church these days, we lament that people are not coming to us. They're not coming to church anymore. It's good to be reminded that the basic movement of the church as Christ's body is not to have people come in, but for us to be going out. The gospel we have received is meant to be lived in the world. The church is called to have a missionary impulse, which comes from Jesus' own mission, to proclaim and show forth the mercy of God, and to reach out to others, especially those in greatest need, as Jesus himself did. Shortly after Pope Francis was elected as Pope, he met with journalists and told them the story of his choice of the name Francis. He related how he was seated next to his good friend, Cardinal Claudio Hummus, in the Sistine Chapel as the votes were being tallied. And when the votes reached 2/3, Cardinal Hummus embraced him and said, "Don't forget the poor." Pope Francis related, "Those words came to me, the poor, the poor. Then right away, thinking of the poor, I thought of Francis of Assisi, who gives us this spirit of peace, the poor man. How I would like a church which is poor and for the poor." What would it mean to be a church that is poor and for the poor? A church reaching out, a church seeking justice. For one thing, it would mean learning to walk closely alongside those who are in need, to get to know them, to walk in solidarity with them. For Pope Francis, the poor aren't a general category. They have real names, real stories, and are enmeshed in real and often complicated situations. Speaking to young people, the Holy Father said, "Look, you can't speak of poverty without having the experience of the poor. You can't speak of poverty in the abstract. That doesn't exist. Poverty is the flesh of the poor Jesus, in that child who is hungry, in the one who is sick, in those unjust social structures. Let us go out to meet them, look into their eyes, and listen to them. The poor provide us with a concrete opportunity to encounter Christ himself and to touch his suffering flesh." In the early church, a key part of the catechumenate for those joining the church was a learning to reach out to those in need. It's interesting that early Christian communities didn't seem to spend much time talking about growth strategies or outreach programs. What they strived to do was to be a church reaching out, to look upon discipleship as a way of life. The God who took hands in Jesus was summoning them to use their hands to reach out as he had done, to live in such a way as he had lived, to live with the same hope as he did. Faith wasn't just about what they had come to believe, but about where they put their lives. When I was a seminarian some 30 years ago, I remember taking a trip to Toronto to attend a conference. I had a very tight budget and basically had enough to pay my room and eat very simple meals, no more. I was walking down Bloor Street on the way to the conference and saw someone on the sidewalk begging. I gave the fellow a wide berth, walked on the far side of the sidewalk in order not to catch his attention. After passing him by, I began to chastise myself, thinking, wow, well, I didn't have enough money to give him, but at least I could have smiled and said hello. Half a block later, sure enough, I saw another person holding out a hand, looking for a handout. This time I walked nearby and tried to smile warmly at the fellow. He asked if I could give him $1, and I smiled again and said, no, unfortunately, I didn't have any money to spare. He said, how about 50 cents? I apologized and explained I didn't even have 50 cents. He said a quarter would be fine. I smiled and said, I didn't have a quarter. He said, you don't even have a quarter? I said, no, still smiling. Really, you don't even have a quarter? I said, no. At that point, he reached into his pocket, took out 50 cents, and tried to hand it to me. I said, no, it's okay, I'm okay. But he wouldn't let me leave until I'd taken the 50 cents. I never forgot that encounter. I've remembered it as a sort of parable, one I don't fully understand, but which teaches me all the same. When we reach out to those in need, when we take on their struggles, we not only share what God has given us, but are always recipients as well. We always have much to learn, much wisdom to gain, and our lives are enriched by such encounters. Why so? I don't know exactly, but somehow Christ's promise to come to us in those encounters is fulfilled, and we are blessed. May we live our lives in such a way that we do not hide away from those in need, but rather allow the Lord to continue to come to us in those encounters and receive Him and be blessed by Him there.